the Lakers continue to impress me over and over and over again. Now, even in this most recent game against the Clippers, they were missing 2 starters, and LeBron didn't have a great game, he shot poorly. And yet the most impressive thing is, they still found a way to win, and that's partly because of the brilliance of Luka Doncic, but also the Lakers bench deserves a lot of credit for stepping up big, especially with Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura out of the lineup. But really, the main reason they won this game, and arguably the most impressive thing about the Lakers in this recent stretch, has been the fact that they've been relying on their defense, which has been spectacular. Now, you probably heard the Lakers have the #1 defense as of late, and I'll get into some of the numbers, but I want to be clear before even diving deeper into this video. I'm not going to be over-focusing in on one game or a couple of recent games to say the Lakers are extremely good, but rather, like I did in my last video, which I'll do even more in this video, I'll talk about a few key positive things from this game and some of the recent games, but I primarily wanted to dive into the tangible numbers because numbers remove a lot of the narratives around this team. There are so many narratives around Luka, LeBron, JJ Redick, the whole team. Some of those narratives are good, some are bad. I should note, I'm not even a Lakers fan, I am a Raptors fan, and I get that the media at points does over-focus in on the Lakers, and that can definitely get a little bit annoying, and at points they can be overrated. However, trying to look as objectively at this team as possible, diving into the numbers, watching a lot of their games, I keep coming to the same conclusion that yes, they are legitimately good, they're not being overrated. I'll explain all the reasons why I believe that, maybe you disagree with me, but yes, I'll dive into a lot of the reasons why I believe this team is actually really good. Because currently I have this team as a top 2 team in the West. I believe right now it's either the Thunder or the Lakers that is going to come out of the West. Of course, things can change depending on injuries and matchups and stuff like that, but I'll dive into a lot of the reasons why I believe that. And I will also say, at the time of making this video, the Lakers are the #2 seed in the Western Conference. I want to be clear, the reasons I believe they're a top 2 team in the West have nothing to do with their playoff seeding. In fact, I primarily care how teams have been playing lately, more so than I care about your actual seeding, because I think at times playoff seeding can be very misleading. But I look at the Lakers and their record, and I actually say the way that they're playing currently is significantly better than their current record. But anyway, let me dive into this. Because even when I look at this most recent game against the Clippers, or these couple of recent games against the Clippers, I try my best not to overreact to a game or two, but instead I see these as 2 positive examples of the upward trend this team is on currently. And looking at this game, I could talk about how good Luka was, but the primary thing I liked seeing during this game was just how active they continue to be defensively, especially missing a couple of starters. Everyone is making the extra rotation, they're having active hands, there's the extra effort. One of the crazier stats about this team defensively is the Lakers have held opponents to 102 points or fewer in 7 straight games, which is very hard to do, especially in the modern NBA. But to finally dive into some of these numbers, going back 24 games now, the Lakers actually have the #1 defense, and 24 games is 40% of the season so far because teams have played roughly around 60 games. So for a team to have the #1 defense for the past 40% of the season, that's not nothing. Now, some people might say the Lakers had Anthony Davis on the team, but to be clear, the vast majority of those games, Anthony Davis was not playing or was not on the team. And even if you want to look at only the last 20 games, for example, where Anthony Davis has only played in a couple of those games, they still have the #1 defense. And there might be some people who question, well, how worthwhile is a 20-game sample size? But I do want to point out a couple of things. The first, 20 games is a third of the season so far, so it's not like it's even that small of a sample size. And I actually think how well you've played over the last 20 games is a far better indicator than how well you've played over the past 50 or 60 games. I think it can be far more illuminating to look at how teams are performing right before entering the playoffs in the last 20 or so games, because you look at the Mavericks last season, for example. They had a bit of an up and down season last year, dealing with injuries and stuff like that. Then the trade deadline comes, they get an entirely new team, they kind of tinker around with the lineup for a little bit, they get some more people healthy, and then all of a sudden, the last 20 games of the season, they had the #1 defense, which helped carry them to the finals. So the reason I brought that up is just to say, like, these sample sizes can be very meaningful. Of course, you don't want sample sizes too small, like a couple of games. But even to look at a more precise sample size of how this team has performed without Anthony Davis. So Anthony Davis hasn't played for the Lakers in 14 games. Some of that is because of injury, some of it because he was obviously traded away. And even when you look at the last game he played, it was against the 76ers and he only played 10 minutes. It wasn't a good game for the Lakers. So basically, the last 15 games, Anthony Davis hasn't been playing for this team. So to be more precise, if I only look at the stats for the last 15 games of the season, because that is essentially a team without Anthony Davis, the Lakers still have the #1 defense. They're 12-3 in that stretch, and that of course even includes a couple of strange losses while the Lakers were trying to work Luka Doncic into the team. He was coming back from injury, he was rusty, all these things, and they lost to the Jazz and the Hornets. Obviously 2 bad losses to start the Luka Doncic era, and a lot of people piled on this team for those losses, but considering the Lakers responded with a 6-game win streak, beating some pretty good teams, those 2 games felt a little bit more fluky. As I said, they were working Luka Doncic back into the lineup, but I will say from the outside looking on, one of the major things I was curious about, because I'm not worried about the Lakers offense. I know a lot of people were making a big deal about can LeBron and Luka coexist. They're 2 very ball-dominant players. I always thought that that was a weird complaint when you're looking at 2 of the smartest creators in the NBA. And if anything, I believe both of them would significantly help the other one's game, because obviously having to do all the creation on offense can be extremely taxing. So the fact that they can actually take turns is a massive help, especially considering it's a lot harder to blitz one of them if they can just pass it to the other one on the court and then he can do all the creation. And personally, just watching these games so far, both Luka and LeBron seem to have a lot more energy on both sides of the ball, because both of them are being asked to do less offensively because they have the other one. But looking at the defense, how is the defense faring since Luka Doncic got there? Well, in the last 9 games since Luka started playing for this team, although he did miss the Portland game, so he's only played 8 of those games, the Lakers still have the #2 defense in that 9-game stretch, only behind the Pistons, who also have been playing some great basketball recently. And keep in mind, those great defensive stats also include those 2 bad losses when the Lakers were trying to work Luka Doncic into the lineup and back into shape. And even if you want to look at how the Lakers have performed in this 6-game win streak, although it is a very small sample size, the Lakers of course have the #1 defense with a staggeringly low defensive rating of 104.5. Now keep in mind, their defensive rating over the last 20 games with Anthony Davis playing in a couple of those games was 107.0. So in other words, on this win streak with Luka Doncic on the team, their defense only seems to be improving and improving. Now again, I do want to be clear that 6-game win streak is a very small sample size, so I don't read too much into that. So I use that only to say it's a positive sign at least. If you watch Luka play, especially with having LeBron and having to do less offensively, he seems far more engaged defensively. And to be fair, I believe Luka's bad defensive reputation is largely overblown, especially because of last year's finals. Now, of course, I'm not trying to say Luka is one of the best defenders in the league or anything like that, but I am also trying to say, especially when he's locked in and he doesn't have to carry an offense and is just exhausted, he's not a bad defender at all. Even looking at that finals, because I believe some of the narratives have gone a little too far. Sure, Luka didn't play the greatest defense, especially as that series went on. He kept getting blown by. Now, he deserves some criticism for that, but also it's hard to criticize him too much because he was severely banged up by the time of the finals. He was getting all sorts of injections. So as that series went on and he was playing over 40 minutes a game, he was really having to carry the entire offensive load for massive stretches. And he was banged up. It just wasn't a great series. But even with all that being said, defense was not why the Mavericks lost that series. Because keep in mind, the Mavericks held the Celtics to only 101.6 points per game, which is way below what other teams were able to do. This was a Celtics team averaging over 120 points per game. The issue was, of course, the Mavericks had a lot of trouble scoring, but I do feel like I've talked enough about their defense. As I said in my last video though, I actually think that there's a better reason to truly believe in this team as the legitimate contender, and I mentioned it in the last video. I'll get into more of the numbers in this video, because as I said in that video, one of the best indicators of how good you actually are, and if you are actually a contender, is what is your net rating, because that accounts for so many things offensively and defensively. And for anyone who's not really sure what net rating is, net rating essentially measures how much your team scores more than they give up per 100 possessions. So obviously the better your net rating is, the better your team usually is. And for context, the all-time leaders in net rating are a lot of the teams people associate with being some of the greatest teams of all time. Like the 96 Bulls are #1 in net rating. Number 2 is the 97 Bulls, then it's the 2017 Warriors. So I say all that to say, while the stat should never be overused, it is usually a pretty good indicator of how good you actually are. And when you look at this year's leaders in net rating, they are the Thunder, then the Cavs, then the Celtics. So you might be wondering, where are the Lakers? Well, they're actually 13th on the year, which is definitely an okay net rating, but it's not good enough to win a title. However, just like what I did with the defense, I'm going to look at a smaller sample size because I care far more about how have you been playing recently, because I think it's a better view of how good you actually are. And for context, even looking at last year's season leaders in net rating, you have the Celtics, then the Thunder, then the Timberwolves, then the Nuggets. all teams people associated with being some of the best teams last year. Now, of course, the Celtics had the best net rating and would go on to win. And of course, the team that's noticeably absent from that list are the Dallas Mavericks, but again, I mentioned how they made all their trades, they got people back healthy, and then the last 20 games of the season, and I'm looking at the final 20 games because that's leading right into the playoffs, the Mavericks had the #1 net rating in the West. That even includes the final 2 games where they sat everyone and got blown out in both of those games. And they had the second best net rating in the league, only behind the Boston Celtics, and of course, those were the 2 final teams. So I say all that to say, in other words, looking at this stat, especially leading into the playoffs or over the last 20 or so games, can give a better picture of how good some teams are, especially when they make changes. And I believe the Lakers are in the same camp as the Mavericks last year, but I think that they're far closer to a team like the Thunder than the records indicate. Because this year, when looking at net rating over the last 20 games, the Lakers have the 3rd best net rating in the league, only behind teams like the Cavaliers and Thunder. Just ahead of teams like the Pistons, the Celtics, and the Nuggets. And shout out to the Pistons because I believe they're being underrated. I'm actually going to make a video on the Pistons because I really like the basketball they've been playing recently. So I think based on that, if people are still saying the Lakers aren't a legit contender, I just don't think that that's factually accurate looking at these numbers. So again, I want to be clear, I'm not definitively saying the Lakers are going to win a championship or anything like that, because I understand there are a lot of good teams. A lot has to go right for them. But I simply wanted to point to some of these numbers, some of the stuff I'm seeing on the court, and I just wanted to say these are all signs, in my opinion, that the Lakers are indeed a top 3 to 4 contender in the entire league to win it all. And personally, even though it's a small sample size, which is definitely increasing and I will monitor it, in the games that Luka Doncic has played, the Lakers' defensive rating has not gotten worse. In fact, over this win streak, it's gotten even better, and it was already #1. So I don't think he'll make their defense worse, and even if he does, it won't be much worse. But what I do believe is that he'll make their offense much better. Because even over this last 20 games where they've had the #1 defense, their offense has been just fine with the 10th ranked offense. And again, they're still winning a lot of these games where Luka Doncic has been kind of subpar, especially with shooting the basketball. Now, he does seem to be ramping up to where he was before he got injured. But the fact is, even when I look at their net rating over the past 20 games, the fact that it's just top 3 with a good offense does make me wonder just how good it will be once they really start clicking offensively with Luka, LeBron, and Austin Reeves there. Because even when I look at the 2 teams above them in the Thunder and the Cavaliers, they have historically great net ratings, and the Lakers are closing in more and more on that. Of course, they're not there quite yet. And to be fair, if you still wanted to say the Thunder are the best team in the West, I fully understand that. I'm not going to push back on that much. I personally would like the Lakers' chances in a playoff series if these 2 met, but again, a lot could change, a lot could happen. I'm simply making this video to say yes, the Lakers are a top 2 team in the West, in my opinion. But everything I'm seeing from the Lakers shows me they're on an upward trend. And I could even briefly talk about some of the advantages I think the Lakers will have, particularly come playoff time, like experience, and even their style of play, like how good Luka and LeBron are when things slow down in the half-court offense. Because again, there is a difference between regular season basketball and playoff basketball. In the playoffs, there's less transition opportunity, your half-court offense and your half-court defense matters significantly more. In fact, as great as the Lakers' defense has been over the stretch of the last 15 games, they of course have the #1 defense, they are only 23rd in opponent fast break points, which is not very good. It's definitely the weak point of their defense. So in that stretch, if they have the #1 defense with their transition defense being that bad, that should tell you how insanely good their half-court defense is. Which again is something that will only become more and more important come playoff time. And then of course I could talk about other things such as how Luka's stats actually get better in the playoffs. LeBron has so much playoff experience. Of course you might say he's 40 years old, but he's not playing like a 40-year-old. In fact, since Luka Doncic got there, he seems to have a lot more energy, and even before Luka got there, he was playing some phenomenal basketball. But either way, I say all of this to say, I truly believe in the Lakers' chances this year. I believe the West is kind of between them and OKC. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. Please share your thoughts, and if you like this video and you want to see more, please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.